Tonight I will be telling 6 stories. 5 of these stories will be related to the paranormal, from stories of ghosts, demons, witches, and the astral plane. We have a story for pretty much all extensions of the paranormal. I figured adding one story that isn't paranormal based would be fun, so you guys won't know right away which story isn't. Maybe add a little guessing factor to the video. A huge thank you to the writers who allowed me to share their stories. They are the ones that make these videos possible, and there are links to where you can find more of their work in the description. I can't express enough how thankful I am for everybody who sends in a story, allows me to read a story, or anything of that nature, because it is what keeps this channel thriving. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, likes and comments are always appreciated. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I used to break into houses. I'm not particularly proud of it, but it was a different time in my life, a more desperate time. I won't make excuses for it. All I can say is I needed a quick way to make money, and typical employment options were not exactly open to me. My last job, however, something happened that I can never explain, and also never forget. Something I have never really told anyone, but I think it will drive me insane if I don't. Maybe I am heading there anyway. I had a buddy named Sam who helped me, or rather, I helped him since he was more experienced at the whole career criminal thing. I did this for about 2 years, going into houses, taking whatever we thought was worth it. We only ever did it when we were absolutely sure nobody was home. Sometimes we would stake out a place for weeks or even a few months. We tried not to get anything too physically heavy. Pretty much anything valuable was fair game. Sometimes we would keep things for ourselves though. We once found a few 8 balls of coke and made a pretty good windfall out of that at this one place. Sometimes we just found pot or booze, but usually we just partook of that ourselves, usually in celebration of a successful job. A lot of times we would take little knickknacks we thought were cool too. Keychains, clothes, stuff like that. Sam had found us a nice little mark for a little bacon and eggs, our code word for our little thing. It was out of the way, so minimum chances of witnesses, and apparently the owner was trying to sell it, and was no longer living there, but had yet to move all their stuff. This was an unusually easy job. That should have been a hint. It sounded like a cakewalk. We just had to time it right and be careful. We decided we would want to start after dark the following Friday. We had to arrange to borrow the van we used, which incidentally cut TC, the guy who owned the one we used in some of the action. TC was a madman, but we needed him. And for this kind of work, you need a specific kind of vehicle. It was a piece of junk, but it had a lot of space, and was easy to change. We repainted it and switched the tags on it at least a dozen times after, and before every job we used it. The ride there was long. It was a bit out of the way, and Sam only knew of it cause he knew a guy that knew the owner that let it slip what the situation was. It had only taken a bit of online research to find the address based on the fact it was for sale. It was unusually empty on the highway for a Friday night, but we rarely went this far into the boonies. Dusk was falling. So why is the guy even selling the place? I asked Sam. I think Mikey told me about it, but I was more interested in the other details, not so much if anything is wrong with the house. This bothered me a little. Yeah, well, what if the place has a gas leak or mold or something? I asked. I looked at him and he leaned back. Then I guess this might be our last job together. Nice knowing you, buddy. I remember him saying that while smirking. He must have sensed I was a little nervous. Relax. If it was anything serious, they would not be putting it on the market so fast, would they? He said. Something was kneading at me about the whole situation, but just barely. A little prick in the back of my mind that I could not quite figure out. The sky got darker, and there were fewer and fewer cars on the road. There were no headlights either, only open fields and dark thickets on either side of us. We got into town a bit after 10 p.m., and it was drizzling a little. We waited a bit longer at a gas station parking lot before going to the place. It was an old house. Not like ridiculously so, but you could tell it had probably been built before cars were a thing. The house was out of the way, a few blocks from any neighbors, so we had that as an advantage. It was 3 stories including the attic, but Sam also told me there was a basement. It was fogging up from the rain, which was actually great, as it would give us farther cover. Everything seemed perfect, and yet something about the house seemed off to me. I remember a slight sense of foreboding, as a large wooden structure seemed to loom over us. Yeah, that's the word for how it looked. It was looming. I remember thinking how tall it looked and yet narrow. It had a very angular designed triangular roof, and was made mostly of wood, it looked like. I asked Sam about the potential for cameras or alarms, and he shrugged. We had a police scanner, in addition to radios to keep in touch. We just gotta boogie on out if there's an alarm. And we got masks and gloves for cameras. Come on, let's do this. He said as we moved towards the back of the house, going around the side. We had an idea of what the place was like, and yet there was a cellar in the back which led into a sub-basement. We had brought bolt cutters, and made short work of the chain and padlock. A faint spark flying from the strain of the cut, as we opened the cellar doors carefully, and looked down at the wooden steps that led into the dank, dark basement. I remember the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I remember not knowing for sure that something was bothering me about this place. It was not a superstitious type. I never believed in ghosts or demons or anything like that. But there was just something about how the whole thing was going down. An instinctive dread that had been building steadily. It was more than the typical nerves and adrenaline that came with doing a job. This was different. Like a tiny bell ringing somewhere in the city of the mind, letting the villagers know to go inside. Oh ho ho, bogeyman living down here. Sam teased, probably sensing the apprehension. I'll go first then. He said as he crept down the stairs and put on his flashlight. It was a bright one too. And as I followed and turned on mine, I was a bit put off by how little of the cellar they were illuminating. The darkness was sticking, and stubbornly refused to be washed away by the light easily. Too thick to be completely dispelled. It was not the kind of thing you can confirm as really being a problem, but it was enough to be annoying at best, and unsettling at worst. There might be some old wine down here. That shit might sell, eh? I asked. But it's not like me and Sam knew people in the vineyard business. We separated a bit, and I did not like that. But I was refusing to give in to my anxiety. We were professionals at this point, after all. I heard the sound of the bolt cutters again, then I heard Sam making a weird noise from the other room before yelling out. What in the flying ever living... Yo, come and see this! I followed his voice, and I felt the room I was in was getting a little chilly. I thought I had seen shadows moving, but I chalked it up to the tricky lighting of my flashlight. When I got to Sam, he was in a separate room behind a heavy metal door. What we were looking at was disturbing. It was like some of a weird cross between a BDSM party room and some kind of shrine. I let out a whistle, my discomfort forgotten as I absorbed the scandalousness of it all. This was out there. Red walls, leather suits hanging on hooks, candles with weird-looking statues. There was a strange sort of altar. It looked like it had a brass frame, and there was a red cloth over it, though it was dusty and torn. There was one particular idol on it that looked to be 4 people intertwined in an act of debauchery and torture. The wax the figures were made out of were melded together to create the gruesome figurine. I had never seen anything like it before, and that foreignness made it all the more unsettling. This was not something you recognize from the movies or folklore, which made it seem all the more real and yet strange. Each pale face on the idol was a mixture of horror, agony, and something else. Maybe pleasure. What the hell? I said in a low tone. I felt the overwhelming urge to turn the light on. We normally did not turn on lights, for obvious reasons. But we were still in the basement, and being seen was not likely anyway, given the house's relative seclusion. I went to feel for a light switch and found one. I flicked it, but it would not go on. It clicked again and again, but I was not getting any juice. Do you know if the electricity is still on here? I asked. Sam shrugged. You know we should not be doing that. Come on. For the first time in his voice, he did not sound like everything was a joke. A few seconds after was when we heard something in the corner of the room. A thump. We both turned to point our flashlights at the source of the sound, but there was nothing. I remember asking, this is a hell of a thing to show on the open house, I bet. But I knew this room was not meant to be seen yet by any prospective buyers. Yeah, let's just get this done, he said. Even despite the creepy sound, whatever went on down here was probably not anything we wanted to know too much about, or stick around too long to be introduced to it. It occurred to me that if the owner came home, we might be in deeper trouble than we ever imagined. I wanted to get it over with, and get out. Not end up as some weirdo's sacrificial gimp in their secret velvet magic dungeon. We checked out the basement, and found some power tools we could sell, putting them near the stairs that led out. I was focusing hard on looking, and quickly moving the goods, ignoring the growing anxiety in the back of my brain, a rattling of the cage of my mind. The cage that stops us from acknowledging what we do not see. I wanted to get out of the basement, but I did not want to venture into the rest of the house alone. "Want to help me check out the upstairs?" I asked Sam, trying to keep the apprehension out of my voice. Maybe Sam was not as brave as I was giving him credit for, because he seemed very keen on the idea. We walked up the stairs a bit more quickly than we normally did, and found the door was locked from the other side, which was also pretty odd. Someone could easily end up locked in the basement, with the cellar being bolted on the outside, and the door leading to the first floor also being locked from the outside. It was becoming apparent that this seemed to be the point, to keep someone from getting out of the basement. Sam cursed, remarking that it might take a while, and asked me to hold a flashlight while he messed with the lock. I did, and felt more and more unsettled, more vulnerable as he worked and fumbled with the metal. I kept seeing little signs of movement in the darkness surrounding us, but ignored them. I thought I heard something faint in the shadows, but it was hard to tell with my partner in crime messing around with the lock. He got it open after what seemed like it must have been at least 20 minutes, and the door creaked open all too slowly, and all too loudly. We both went into the house proper, and found ourselves in the kitchen. This was the rough part. We knew we had to split up. Sam said he would take the lower floor. He told me to take the upper one. For some reason this irked me, like he gave me the shit job. I did not want to put that much distance between me and our exit, but he was the brains of the operation. I got to the stairs, and they were very steep. Wood, with a narrow wall heading up. The stairs went up into a yawning abyss, an abyss I would rather do anything else other than go into. I went up, one step at a time, carefully. The stairs seemed to go on a bit longer than they should, and I kept the flashlight on the ground to guide my footing, as if the stairs seemed designed to easily trip someone up. I was also afraid to point it into the shadows that waited at the top of the stairs, but when I finally started getting to the summit, I had no choice, and the light I was shining found itself only piercing the darkness to a shallow degree. I remember thinking I had never been in a house so pitch dark before. I heard Sam messing about downstairs, moving stuff. As I went into the upstairs hall, there were a series of doors, and all of them closed. With the damn feeling of dread I had, the thought of opening each one at a time was torture. I was about to start with door number 1, when I heard steps coming up the stairs. I turned around fast as hell, and was relieved to see Sam. It was slim pickings downstairs apparently, so he had to come up to help me handle the upstairs. I was extremely happy about it, but I, of course, didn't show it. I felt just a little bit more courage than I had previously. Then the image of the sick little doll thing on the altar flashed in my mind. Yeah, I wanted to get the hell out of there. Door number 1 was as dark as the rest of the house. It looked like an office, and there was a laptop which I quickly grabbed, as I had to ignore the feeling of being watched. I had done a few jobs like this, but I'd never experienced this level of anxiety, not even in my first one. I took the laptop while Sam rustled around, and told him what my haul was. He asked if I had found anything else, and I said nothing valuable. But to be honest, I'd not really looked all that hard. I just wanted to get out of here. I could not get that room in the basement out of my head. I asked Sam what he had found, but he was not answering, which both irritated and bothered me. "Sam," I hissed. "Sam." His voice came out again. "Dude, there's another weird room in here." I cursed under my breath and went in. It was like the one downstairs, but not quite as ritualized. There were a bunch of weird little idols, strewn about along with candles, and a bookshelf with all sorts of occult stuff in it. I had seen enough. Door number 2 was disturbing, but not as bad as the basement. Sam, however, seemed more amused than he had been in the first one. "This guy is one sick puppy. Alright, go back downstairs, do a quick once-over, and let's get the hell out of here." I was happy to hear that, and did not need telling twice, though I was not happy with separating at the time. I went downstairs, and looked around with my flashlight, seeing that there was an old heavy TV, the kind that most people had not used in about 20 years. It was not worth taking. But I remember thinking it was strange they were still using such primitive stuff. I looked around a bit longer, going through some drawers. There were some things I might have taken for personal use under normal circumstances, but I wanted nothing to do with this place, much less wanting to take a piece of it home with me. I kept checking around, and that's when I saw it. The same statue that had been in the basement, the figure of the 4 intertwined bodies, bound into the unspeakable or unknowable act. There was hunger, lust, agony, bliss. I wondered how anyone could make one of these abominations, much less two. I went to the basement to start bringing some of their stuff out of the house, and I could not help but take another look at the weird room. That's when I noticed that the figurine was no longer on the altar. I remember an icy fist grasping my heart, and I turned on my walkie. The static hit me as I went on the channel. We both used walkies because in case we ever got caught, they could not track our conversations or locations via cell phone. "Sam?" I hissed. "Sam, did you move that sick-looking figurine upstairs?" There was nothing but static. I continued calling into the walkie. Just static. I tried once more. "Sam, answer me." The static turned. "Sam's with us now." A voice whispered. That icy fist on my heart, it clenched harder. "What? Who is this?" The static returned, and I heard what I thought was a short chuckle. A voice came in once more, and was deeper and far harsher, almost guttural. The word inhuman comes to mind. It was different than the last voice.
"Come see."
I cursed hard, and felt the overwhelming urge to drop the walkie, to throw it at the wall the same way one might throw a bug that had crawled on their hand. It invoked revulsion. The walkie was a bridge between me and whatever was on the other side of that channel, and more importantly, what was lurking upstairs. I was worried about Sam. Very worried. I was scared for myself too, but I was not going to just leave him here. The thought occurred to me that this was a trick, a joke, but this was not a time for games, and even if it was one hell of a feat to pull something like this off. No, it didn't make sense. This was not a joke. I was torn between a sense of urgency in helping my friend, and the dread of staying in this house and going farther into it. I steeled myself as best I could, and decided if I had to do it, it was going to be fast. And I ran up the stairs like a bat out of hell, into the kitchen, and back towards the other narrow set of stairs that led upstairs to the second floor. I could hear banging on the walls, scratches. It was like the entire house was coming to life. I tried to ignore it, but it was damn near impossible. And it was all I could do to not piss myself and take off right then and there. Sam be damned, metaphorically and literally. I made it to the foot of the stairs. The darkness at the top was encroaching farther down, invading beyond its borders almost aggressively. The darkness was getting more dense, getting deeper. "Sam?" I called up into the darkness. I could not bring myself to walk up those steps and into the pitch black. I was starting to panic. I saw a shape at the top of the steps. It was a mass, and at first I could not make it out in the darkness, but as it got closer, it became more clear. The lack of visibility did not matter, because I was not seeing whatever this was with my eyes. The only way I could describe it was I was seeing it with my soul. It was the figurine, only life-size now. The four writhing bodies bound together, melted as if their skin was made of wax, limbs intertwining, as they flailed and the abomination crawled slowly down the stairs. I could hear my heart beating in my head. The scratching, the knocking, it had all stopped as if in reverence for what was now coming down those stairs to meet me. Its footsteps uneven from the extra limbs. The deliberate shuffle began as it navigated its way down the path, coming down to me. Its other limbs stretched out as if to embrace me, beckoning me into the hell of its existence. One of the faces turned to look at me, twisted in the rictus of a dozen sensations, lost in equal parts bliss, terror, and torment. It was Sam. I ran. When I did, the noise of the house erupted again, everything banging, and there was a shrieking sound reverberating from the walls that echoed across it, sounding like dozens of separate voices, each one distinct. There was accusation in those shrieks, anger, and hunger. The house was pissed, but it was also hungry. The shrieks became guttural like a pack of dogs, and they yowled like a bunch of cats having sex. I ran for the basement, but the door slammed shut, and I tried to open it, but it would not budge an inch. I could hear the uneven sounds of the abomination coming down, step by step. Then I heard a louder crash. It sounded like it had thrown itself down the steps. It wanted me that bad. It was not wasting time like some horror movie monster trying to build suspense. It was not trying to scare me. It was trying to take me. I thought I heard Sam's voice, weeping. "It hurts so good. It hurts so damn good, buddy. Get some of this." I screamed and pulled with all my might, and the door finally unjammed and I headed down the stairs, tripping halfway down and hitting the ground. I felt pain in my temple, and was bleeding, but I didn't care. I was up again in an instant and going out the cellar door. On my way out, I felt something reach out of the weird room, groping for my neck. Clammy and vice-like. It tore my hoodie but slipped as I ran out into the moisture of the night. I did not care about the goods. I did not care about anything other than getting as much distance from me in this place as I could. Luckily, TC's piece of crap van didn't need a key, and it was turned on via screwdriver. I jumped in and fumbled for it, looking frantically in the rearview mirror. The storm was picking up now. I fumbled harder and did the trick. The van sputtered to life, and I punched it out of there. I only stopped once for gas and was gripped by paranoia, thinking I saw the abomination in every dark corner. I tried to tell TC what happened, but could not really bring myself to speak of it. He was pissed he did not make anything out of it either, and told me to lose his number, accused me and Sam of holding out on him. I never figured out what that house was supposed to be, and I was too afraid to look it up again to see if it had been sold. I am thinking of doing it again, but even opening that tiny door terrifies me. The house taught me something profound in the brief time spent in there. Not knowing was better sometimes. As for Sam, I checked desperately for any news of him being found in that town, but there was nothing. I did not know his family, nor many of his friends. No one came to ask me about him. Sam was prone to wanderlust, and this was not the first time he had just up and vanished. As far as everyone else was concerned, I knew what happened though. They, or it, had told me. Sam was with them now. He would always be with them. She was hauntingly beautiful, if you didn't pay attention to the bloodshot eyes widening at my every move. A pale face with plump, pink lips, and straight white teeth that looked too big and too long to fit inside her small mouth. Delicate hands that casually pawed at the screen of my window, toying with her prey. Me. Closing the curtains meant getting within an inch of the open window, and I wasn't taking that chance. Calling the police meant looking for my phone that I had lost an hour ago, between cooking dinner and discovering my unwanted guest. Did I lock the doors? I couldn't recall, and thinking made me lose focus, something I couldn't afford right now. Her eyes stayed on me wherever I went. Pupils dilated, and a soft scratching came from the nubs on her hands. I thought of asking, well, screaming at her to leave. But I was frozen. Staring back at her seemed wrong. It made me hyperventilate and sent acid to my throat. But turning away seemed deadly. She didn't seem to pose a threat, yet you could feel something radiating from her. It pulsed through my body, made me gag and writhe, until I could come close to looking away. She would smile for less than a second, until my eyes were locked back onto her figure. I'm not sure if the sun shining helped the situation. It didn't change the coldness that struck me in the moment I saw her. It didn't change the fact that I didn't know where my phone was, or that if I were to scream for help, it wouldn't arrive soon enough. A thunk came from somewhere in the far end of my house, which caused me to turn around. I heard a shuffling outside, and she was no longer at my window. My pulse was throbbing, head cloudy with anxiety and fear. I darted into the living room to see her standing at the window, her smile now horrendously wide. I wasn't sure what to do. This could be part of something bigger, a ploy to keep my attention on her and away from something more sinister lurking in my home. Her eyes moved to glare at something behind me, and I almost looked. A soft growl emitted from her lips. I was trembling, close to falling and sobbing on my hardwood floors. Trapped and confused, I had no out other than to stare at her until she left. Her mouth unhinged impossibly wide into a wordless screech. A ringing burst through my eardrum, and blood poured down my neck. Black spots blurred my vision. Still, I kept my eyes trained onto hers. I dug my nails into my hands, feeling the crescents fill with blood. The stinging sensation temporarily brought my focus back until she closed her lips and smiled at me once more. She was gone. I hadn't seen her move. I ambled towards the kitchen, the last room before my front door. At a glance, I saw my phone on the counter, next to her rotting flesh peering through the window. Eyes locked, I slowly made my way towards my only means of help. Every step I took, skin melted from her face, and her smile grew larger. Once I finally reached the counter, she was barely more than bone, chunks of flesh hanging from her haphazardly. I pressed my home button 3 times, a function I'm so thankful I set up. It alerted local authorities and my contacts. Please, let me in. I wanted to kill myself right there. Her voice gnawed at my innards, sent my heart plummeting to my stomach. Another scream crashed through the house, but this time, it was me. She opened her mouth again, laughter vibrating off my walls and through my spine. It echoed forever, an eternity of torment and plague. Her head smacked into my window again and again, each time her face changing to someone I cared for, breaking their false bodies for her own entertainment. The glass cracked. I could taste death on my tongue. Sirens came from the distance and sent her into a frenzy. Harder and harder she smashed her head into the window, pleading for me to let her in, her voice getting higher and higher. I covered my ears and stared, awaiting my life to end, praying she wouldn't kill me slowly. Her arms were wrenching its way in, the bones scraping against shards of glass. Her smiling eyes bore into me. The sirens were getting closer. Suddenly, she was gone. The police were banging on my door. Relief spread through my body. It was over. They searched the house and my property twice. Nothing was found, of course. I was sent to the hospital and then to a mental health institution. She stares at me through the glass panel on my door. There's no escaping her here, and everyone else claims they don't see her. Every night she gets closer, and I'm afraid tonight she may actually come inside. I just wanted to go home, but no, I'm stuck in this goddamn elevator. Let's get this straight. I work for a small newspaper, doing filing and other organizing work, so naturally, I'm in the basement. There aren't any stairs to the basement, because it's somewhat of a newer building, so the only way to reach it was the elevator. The very one that wasn't working, so there I was, just waiting for the fire department to arrive and get me out, when the elevator started moving again. But this time, it started moving down. There's nothing below the basement, or I guess I thought so. The elevator door opened up to a library. It was organized and cozy, with a fire going and big comfy chairs to sit in and read. I should have stayed in the elevator. Instead, I wandered around. Every couple minutes I'd go back to the elevator to try and see if it would work again. Of course it would close, but it wouldn't go anywhere, so I'd go back and wander. As I perused through, they seemed to have endless books, from cheesy romance to great works of literature, some right next to each other, all alphabetical, so I started to play a game. I would think of any book and try to find it. It was always there. Eventually, God knows how much time had passed. So I went back to the elevator. It still wasn't working. Frustrated, I kicked it and went back into the library. As I looked through the books again, no longer specifically searching for certain ones, I noticed that a lot of the books weren't in English. Most were English, but there were a lot of ones in ancient languages. I picked up a book that was written in Greek. I flipped through and found calculus on the pages. I found a book in Egyptian hieroglyphics that probably explained how the pyramids were built, given the drawing and graphs on the pages. These shouldn't exist, but they did, and the library had them, and more. It seemed to contain everything ever written. I stepped back from the shelf, quickly shoving the book back as I smelled something faintly sour and decaying. I was greeted by the immediate feeling that I wasn't really supposed to be here. Then I heard the voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. "You're not supposed to be here." The voice growled, and I felt a claw grip my shoulder. I immediately lurched forward out of its grip and started running towards the elevator. I got in and pressed the closed door button repeatedly, hoping that for once it would make a difference. As the door closed, I looked at the thing chasing me. It wasn't human, but it was close enough. Its form was a bit hard to make out, but I know it had horns. However, the worst part was the eyes. They looked like everything eyes shouldn't be. Huge, bloodshot, with tiny pupils and no irises, surrounded by a gaunt, pale face, and sunken in eye sockets. Its face looked like something that died a long time ago. I don't doubt it did. So now I'm trapped in the elevator. It won't go up, and whatever's out there is knocking occasionally. The elevator won't move and the firemen haven't come for me yet. I don't think they will. Cats, unlike dogs, aren't very good at communicating with their human companions, and I don't know whether they're just born that way, or take some sort of pleasure in their aloofness. They are affectionate when they are in the mood for it, but turn aloof whenever they feel so inclined, even in the most dire situations. Like this one that I was in, when we all need to sit down and talk like men, they shamelessly walk away from us while proudly shaking their butts at us. I stared at the bloody finger on the floor, while trying to think of a way to ask Robert, my gray cat, where it came from. Actually, I did actually try to talk to him, but instead of answering or at least pointing in the direction of the finger's origin like a loyal, helpful dog might do, he just looked at me like I was being unreasonable. After all, he had just brought me a present. So I should be thankful, right? Robert only ever wanted to chat with Sally, the cleaning lady who came daily to help me with the house chores and feed him. Since the day my wife died in a horrific car accident, he seems to have adopted the strategy of avoiding me for the most part. I'm not sure if it was because he thought I was the one who took his favorite owner away, or because he did not want to get close to someone and then lose them all over again. Anyway, Robert would always meow when Sally came, and he sat on the porch to say goodbye every time she left. Now, back to the story. That finger was actually the second one he brought home. The first one was an index finger, and this one was a thumb. The cut on the fingers were precise and calculated, like they were done by a butcher. I didn't report it to the police because I didn't want to get wrapped up in a murder investigation. Given that, up until this morning, I had 2 human digits in my fridge. I hope that makes sense. I was struggling to keep my wits about me because I couldn't find a way to make Robert talk about where he found those goddamn fingers. I started to wonder whether I'd be able to focus on the football game with my neighbor and pal Ned tonight, so I thought about calling him to cancel our fun. I felt guilty about that though because, since the day my wife died, he had helped me a lot with getting through the feeling of emptiness and isolation that comes when you lose your other half. Still, I had to figure out where those fingers were coming from, so I had to keep watching Robert to see where he'd take off to. After half a day of watching him though, I gave in. He didn't seem interested in leaving the house, he just wandered around aimlessly and kept taking naps. So it seemed like I was losing this battle. That was when my phone buzzed, and Ned was on the other side of the line when I picked up. Feeling stressed as hell and unsure of what to do now, I decided to talk to him about my situation. "What's up?" I started talking anxiously. "I'm bringing beers tonight. Can you cover the snacks?" Ned asked excitedly. I don't think I can watch a match tonight, man. Something freaking weird just happened. I actually need your help." "What, really? What's up?" "I can't talk about it over the phone. Just come over when you can." "Alright, bud." Fast forward a few hours, Ned and I were sitting on the floor, staring at the 2 frozen fingers that were now as pale as 2 rotten sausages. "Are you crazy? Why not report this to the cops?" Ned almost whispered. "I don't know. I'm waiting to finish the collection, I guess." I said, hoping to make him feel better with a lame joke. I just don't want to become a suspect, or get involved, you know? "Whatever, you idiot. Have you figured out how to find where they came from?" "Not yet, no. I've been watching the cat the whole day. It's like he's too lazy to head out again." I sighed. Ned looked at me distraught. He must have wished that this was just a normal football night, like we always have. I felt guilty for bringing him into this, but I was beside myself. Anyway, we looked at the fingers for a while and realized they were from the hand of a woman. We couldn't figure anything else out though. "This is weird, man, but okay. Let's stay up in shifts to watch the cat to see where he goes tonight. If you get sleepy, wake me up so I can watch him. Deal?" "Yeah, deal." That night, I stayed up till 3 in the morning and started to nod off. Ned watched him until 7, but he must have fallen asleep sometime during his turn. When I woke up to go check on things, I couldn't believe what happened. "Robert!" I screamed as I almost stepped on another one of his lovely gifts. Another thumb that was kinda rotten now. This time though, there was blood around his mouth and on his belly fur. "Ned, what happened?" I asked. "I must have dozed off. I'm sorry, bud." Ned said with a dumb, redneck look on his face. "Robert has the blood on his stomach, so we can track the blood drip trail," Ned suggested. I noticed that he was pale now. I guess that seeing the blood made him feel like this whole situation was really happening. We followed the blood trail out of the front door, but it disappeared in my tall grass. I was so ready to call the police. Ned nodded his head in approval. Clenched to my phone, I saw an email sent by an anonymous person at 4 in the morning. Curiosity killed the cat. Stay away from this, or I will make sure the cats won't talk. The cats. The person meant us. Robert, Ned, and me. I felt a chill go down my spine. Ned read the message, and he got angrier than I've ever seen him. He's not the type of person that likes being threatened. That motherfucker. Nobody threatens Ned and gets away with it. He muttered under his breath. Stay inside. Wait there. He ran back home and into his house, brought out his axe and pushed it into my hands. He insisted I keep it. We should stay before the police come and get whoever this guy is. I'm going to borrow a shotgun from that guy Tony. He goes hunting a lot. Don't do anything stupid by yourself. Like most southern gentlemen, Ned was very kind and friendly under normal circumstances. But when someone rustles his feathers, he won't stop until they're beaten. By then, I was so freaked out that I broke out in a cold sweat. I took the axe and went back to my house. Even though Tony's house was just a few blocks away, watching Ned leaving in his red truck to get that shotgun gave me this weird feeling that I might not see him again. Maybe this crazy lunatic would get him first. Robert looked at me emotionless. Cats. I stared at the 3 fingers that were now lying on the floor, thinking about how someone met their end, probably nearby, to this killer. Maybe there are others who are still in danger. That's when I realized that the 2 thumbs were left-handed thumbs. It means that they came from different hands. Different people. At least 2 people are either dead or messed up really badly. The whole thing just went from a spooky story to a damn horror film. I panicked and tried to call Ned, but he didn't pick up. Robert seemed to get anxious because I was losing my shit. He started to make weird cat noises that eventually turned into frantic meowing as he tried to scratch the floor relentlessly. I kept quiet, trying to figure out what he's doing. What was he trying to tell me? Suddenly, he went silent and ran straight out the front door. I kept the axe close to my chest and ran after him, afraid of losing sight of him. Robert bolted into the grass of my lawn and turned right. He eventually ran to the work shed next door and squeezed through a big hole in its wooden wall. The door of the shed was locked, so I smashed the door down with the axe to get in. The nauseating smell of rotten flesh hit me like a bomb just went off in my nose. I almost threw up. I looked around and saw a big plastic drum filled with chopped up body parts of someone, and a smaller drum had an arm and a half-frozen foot in it. What I realized right then was the most horrific thing I have ever experienced. It answered so many questions that seemed so unrelated. Why has Sally not come over for the past 2 days? Why did my wife get into a car accident near the woods that night? The answers for those questions lay there as dead as could be. Sally's head was in the big drum mixing with parts of her chopped up body. And in the smaller drum, I saw the wedding ring of my dear Helena, still resting on her ring finger. See, she got so mangled in her wreck that some parts of her, hand included, were never found, but we never thought anything of it because of how severe the crash was. Now though, I wondered whether it was truly the crash that took her from me. My heart started to beat out of my chest, and my legs got so weak that I almost collapsed. Robert started to hiss and meow neurotically. The hair on his back stood up. He paced around me as if trying to tell me something. He loved them both, Helena and Sally. What are you trying to say? I stuttered in nearly incomprehensible words, clenching the axe in my hands. Try as he might, he couldn't share his secret with me. It was not until Ned came back in his red truck with a shotgun did I know what Robert was trying to tell me, something that in the midst of panic and fright, I didn't realize. I was standing in Ned's shed. Growing up, I was the only daughter to my single mother until I was 7 years old. At 7, I was granted a wish I wanted dearly in the form of my darling little sister. Jenna was the blessing of all blessings. She helped make Mom and I into a real family, and we were better for it. But even with a little angel in the house, things weren't always merry and bright. As a child, I spent much of my time home alone. This was more than acceptable growing up in the mid-90s, as most crimes occurred in bad neighborhoods. As an 8-year-old, I would regularly walk home alone, and often distractedly, looking at all the little worlds I saw around me. I had a wild imagination. There was one house in the neighborhood that seemed different from the rest, and I always imagined it to be some kind of haunted mansion, because I had never seen anyone going in or coming out. The large yard had full, towering trees, with the house tucked away behind them. The pathway leading up to the front porch was lined with overgrown bushes and wildflowers, giving it a secret garden type of look. One Halloween, while trick-or-treating, I overheard some kids say our school's old librarian lived there, and thought that was odd because our librarian didn't seem very old to me. I later found out it was a librarian who had previously retired from that school. After hearing this, I immediately imagined that the house had a library similar to the one in Beauty and the Beast. I loved reading, and this made my heart flutter every time I passed the mysterious home. When I was about 10 while walking home, I passed the house I had come to call Bell Mansion, and noticed something peculiar through the second floor window. I saw a figure staring down at me from behind the curtain. I say figure because I couldn't really tell if it was a man or a woman. I knew it was an adult, however, because the figure was taller than the window, and appeared to be stooping down to look at where I had stopped. Now, I was a child who spent a lot of time by myself, but as a veteran latchkey kid, what I was seeing raised major red flags. I swiftly walked out of view of the home, and after making it to the next street, ran the rest of the way home. That night, after dinner, I told my mom about it. My mom worked in the mortgage industry, and it was a lucrative career affording her the ability to financially care for my sister and I without much struggle. But my mom did not always live in a safe neighborhood, and because of this, she immediately began questioning me about my experience when walking home. Who was it? What did you do? Where's the house? I have a couple questions to ask. I told Mom that the person hadn't really done anything, and that they could have been looking at something else around me. I told her that although it was strange, I would just walk across the street when passing the house. My mom seemed unsure, but I felt she had enough to worry about between work and my sister, so I reassured her it was nothing to freak out over. Later that night, while lying in bed, I wondered who the person was in the window. Even though I had told my mom it was nothing to worry about, the experience still left me uneasy. It wasn't even the fact they were looking out the window, but the way this person was positioned made it seem like they wanted to be hidden, and that didn't sit well with me. Nevertheless, I began to read my book, and eventually fell into a deep sleep. While asleep, I suddenly felt a rush of cold air blow over my face, and sat straight up. Looking over, I saw my fan moving from side to side, and laid back with a sigh of relief. But then I heard something. It was a light sound like water dripping, but there wasn't a faucet remotely close to my bedroom. I strained to hear where the sound came from, and realized it was whispering. I looked at my clock and saw that it was 3 in the morning. Why would Mom or Jenna be up right now? Maybe Jenna was sick. With this thought, I got out of bed, putting my feet into my slippers. I don't like to shut the door when sleeping, so I walked straight through my doorway, but immediately stopped. Not only was there whispering, but one whisper seemed much deeper than any sound my mother or sister would make. This sent chills down my spine, and molded a slab of concrete in my gut. My first instinct was to scream for my mother, because I knew the whispers were coming from Jenna's room. But then I thought, what if they try to run away with her? My mom's room was on the other side of the house with my sister's room directly in between us, and I couldn't risk the intruder harming my sister while I called for help. I would have to sneak up to them, and I would have to do it alone. I quietly returned to my room, slipping off the slippers, and grabbed my softball bat. Slowly I padded back to my sister's room, where her door was cracked just enough to see through. I peered in and began scanning the room. Within seconds, I saw the source of the whispers. On the bed, standing on her tippy toes, was my 4-year-old sister with her head out of the window, and appeared to be talking to someone on the side of our house. Fear was replaced with rage, and I burst into the room. Running up to the window, I looked out and saw nothing. No one was there. I whisper-yelled at Jenna, asking her who was outside her window, and why she was talking to them. Alarmed by my anger, Jenna meekly stated she was talking to the Shadow Man. I indignantly asked her who was Shadow Man. Relaxing a bit and looking a little confused, Jenna claimed that the Shadow Man had told her he knew me. I dropped the bat and felt my stomach do the same. Now was the time to call for Mom. The next day, Mom and I marched over to the home where I had seen the dark figure while Jenna stayed with Grandma at the house. When we were approaching the house, my heart started racing and I felt myself slow down a little. My mom noticed and grabbed my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. We walked through the path of wildflowers and shrubbery, and stepped up to the front porch. I looked up at Mom, who showed no signs of hesitation as she knocked on the screen door. As the door behind the screen slowly opened, my mom let go of my hand and approached the doorway. An old woman appeared with a bun of dark gray hair on her head and a large, thin cane. My mom was taken aback. She had expected someone much more menacing, but still began asking the woman if she had seen any strange men wandering around the neighborhood last night. The old woman looked at my mom indifferently, and then looked down at me with a large grin spreading across her face. As she stared, still smiling, the woman responded saying she had seen no strange men, then looked back at my mom and her smile disappeared. Mom, noticing this strange reaction, thanked the woman for her time, and quickly grabbed my arm to walk through the tunnel of nature back to the sidewalk. I looked back at the woman one more time as we turned the corner, and noticed a growing shadow behind her, as she smiled and winked at me. As soon as we got home, my mom was on the phone. I assumed she was calling the police because it seemed obvious those were the kind of bad people you would call police for. But Mom wasn't calling the police. A couple hours later, a car pulled up in the driveway, and my mom's cousin stepped out of the driver's side. He walked over to the passenger side, opened the door, and helped my grandmother's sister out of the car. I immediately knew why she was there. My great-aunt was a very spiritual person. In her Catholic church, she is something of a prayer warrior. Many people from all over would write down their prayers and send to her for spiritual aid. Upon entering our home, my great-aunt began preparing the blessing. As she walked from room to room, holy water was distributed along with a Spanish prayer. After finishing her blessing of the rooms, we all sat at the table, hands clasped in as she spoke. In that moment, I felt power unlike anything I had ever felt. There was a warmth running through me, and I began to say my own prayer of strength. Once the blessing was completed, our aunt informed us that the house was protected. I offered to help her back into the car so my mom and her cousin could catch up. While walking down the driveway, I asked her if the blessing would really protect our house. She smiled and caressed my cheek, telling me, "Of course, mija." I think she could tell that I still felt unsure about it all, and I began to describe the house with the figure I had seen in the window. Her smile slowly fell, and she gave me a reproachful look. She explained to me that there are people who also have spiritual abilities, like her, but choose to use them for darkness rather than light. She then gently touched the cross around my neck and told me that through this cross is symbol of protection. True strength comes from within, and lightly patted my chest. After this whole experience, Grandma started picking me up after school, but after a few weeks the intensity of it all went away and the normal routine fell into place. I began walking home during a week when my grandma was out of town. Walking home didn't bother me, but I did feel uneasy whenever passing the old house. While walking home one day, I avoided looking in the direction of the house, as usual. Suddenly, I felt butterflies in my stomach. I don't know where this feeling came from. It caused me to look up at the second floor window, just as I had only weeks before. To my horror, in the window was Jenna. She was staring down at me from above. She made no move to motion towards me. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. She was gone. I began to panic and thought, how could she have been taken? She should be at daycare. I wanted to run home and call my mom, but again, I felt that with all the time it would take to do that, Jenna could be harmed. I made the decision that I would not leave her alone in that house. Approaching the side of the house from the sidewalk, I looked for a discreet way to get into the backyard. I noticed a section of the fence where overgrown trees had pushed into the fence, creating a gap I could squeeze through. The backyard was an even bigger, overgrown mess than the front. Contemplating how to get inside the house, I noticed a trellis wrapped in vines leading up to a small window. Feeling this was the best way I could get in, unnoticed, I went along the fence to the wall with the trellis and began climbing. I was pretty scared of heights, but I had experience climbing trees with my cousins during the summer. I was feeling more confident with each step when something grabbed my foot, causing me to lose my grip, and I fell back to the ground, immediately blacking out. I began to wake and felt a shot of pain throughout my body. My back felt like I had been hit with a bat, and as I slowly regained consciousness, I began to notice a burning feeling all over my arms and legs. This woke me instantly, and I realized I was tied to a dining room chair. I looked down at my body and found the source of the stinging. Tiny cuts dried with blood covered my arms and legs. I wanted to scream, but I had been gagged with a cloth, and my eyes automatically filled with tears. Tears turned into sobbing as I looked around the large, dark room I was trapped in. I heard rattling from the next room, which I presumed to be the kitchen, and out came the old librarian. Her bun was gone, giving away to stringy hair that looked like a ragged mop. Her eyes were wide and her smile even wider. I began to scream through my gag, which she pointedly removed. Sobbing, I begged her to let my little sister go, and she could keep me instead. The woman started snickering, which soon turned into maniacal laughter. She told me my little sister wasn't here, and that she never had been. Through bouts of laughter, she explained that the Shadow Man knows what we truly want most in life. In my case, protecting my sister is most important to me, and the Shadow Man had lured me into the home with a vision of her. I felt so confused. How could I have seen her if she really wasn't there? Then I remembered the conversation with my great aunt, and started to put the pieces together. The old woman went back to the other room, talking quickly and not making much sense. At this point, I began testing the strength of the ropes that bound me to the chair. Fortunately for me, the ropes were not so tight, and I was able to wiggle around a bit. Another fortunate fact for me was that I was double jointed, and had no issue with reaching my arm around to find the knot tied behind my back. Deftly, my hand found the knot, and I began to feel for a loose spot. Eventually the knot began to loosen and, in turn, so did the rope. My victory was cut short when I heard the old hag coming back, and I remained still, so she would not notice the progress I had made. When she leaned in to grab the cross from my neck, I took my chance. Bracing myself using the chair, I kicked her in the chest with both feet. She fell back with a scream and I broke from my restraints and ran. I got to the front door and found it to be padlocked. Looking around, I noticed the stairs, and remembered the small window that I had intended to break in through earlier. Running up the stairs, I heard the woman's frantic footsteps approaching behind me, but I was smaller and faster. When I got to the second floor, I ran to the room at the end of the hall where I thought the window might be, and locked the door shut. Looking around, I was mesmerized by a wall-to-wall library. Even in spite of the ever-approaching danger, I was blown away to see a library like this in real life. I walked over to one of the shelves to look at the books, but noticed a large book opened on the desk. In it was an image of a small person spread out on a table, with blood dripping from their arms and legs. Looking down at my own small cuts, I was snapped back into reality. I looked around, hopeful for a window, but instead saw a phone. I immediately grabbed for it and began to dial 911. Just as I was pressing the last one, the door flew open, and in one swift movement, the old woman yanked the phone and threw it against the bookshelf, effectively destroying it. She dragged me through the hallway and down the stairs, with a strength I didn't think was possible in a woman of her age. But instead of heading back to the area she had previously held me, I was taken through a door adjacent from the front and down some stairs into what looked like a basement. In the basement, it was dark and smelled the way our car had smelled when there was a dead mouse stuck in the engine. As we got to the center of the basement, I immediately saw a large, surgical-looking table, fastened with 4 buckle straps at each end. I tried fighting as she strapped me in, but her strength was unreal. After I was secured to the table, she lit red candles and began reciting out of a large book in a language I didn't understand. I was terrified. I had never felt so much dread and started to pass out from the shock. The old woman approached me with a small knife, and I noticed a growing, all-consuming shadow rising behind her. Praying for protection and thinking back to the blessing of our home, I started to feel the same surge of warmth as before. In that moment, a hard thump was heard from upstairs, distracting us both. A couple more bangs gave way to a pop similar to a firework. I heard the door fly open, and I began screaming, to which the old lady responded by cutting my cheek and hissing before she ran upstairs. A chorus of banshee screams along with rapid footsteps was heard on the floor above me before one last pop erupted. The last thing I remember before drifting out of consciousness was the face of my mother and the touch of her hands. Waking up, the smell of dank, sticky air was replaced with something sterile and dry. I opened my eyes to the sight of my mother. This time she was slumped in the chair next to my hospital bed, asleep. I glanced at the bandages wrapped around my arms and felt the ones around my legs. Stirring a little, I tried to stretch my sore limbs, which woke my mother. She opened her eyes and gave me her biggest smile. Coming over to sit with me, she gives me a long hug. I looked up at her with tears in my eyes and started to explain why I had gone to the house, but she calmly stopped me with a look of admiration and kissed me on the forehead. With that, I smiled and contently fell back into sleep. I was later told the old librarian had not retired. She was fired due to her alarming behavior around children at the school. Several children had gone missing since, and authorities had not connected the disappearances due to the 10-year time frame of the abductions. When my mom had called the house to make sure I had gotten home safely, she was not immediately worried that I didn't answer. However, after the 3rd call, she knew something was wrong and left work early. When she got home and was sure I wasn't there, She loaded her .357 revolver and went to the place where she was sure I would be. After kicking on the door a few times, she shot the handle and kicked in the door of the old home. Before she could even look at me, the old lady ran at her through the basement door with a knife raised above her head. Without hesitation, my mother had shot her directly in the forehead, instantly killing the old witch. Before I start, I want to say that I've always had a fascination with otherworldly things. I was obsessed with ghost stories growing up, and I swore that every house I went into was haunted. As I got older, my fascination didn't dim. I'm a practicing witch now, and it's all because of these experiences. For as long as I can remember, I've had what I've now come to call visions. Now, unlike psychics or mediums, I don't see flashes of the past or of someone else's past lives. I see random images of destruction. I would be sitting in class, fully alert, when I would all of a sudden see a gore-filled image of a broken battlefield, or a girl with limbs torn from their sockets. Of course, it was traumatizing. I would scream, and people began to assume I had schizophrenia. Hell, I thought I was going crazy. Eventually, those images started translating into longer visions, and became nightmares instead of showing themselves in the daylight. But they still appear every now and again. One of the frequent images was simple: a white mask with 2 black holes for eye sockets, and an empty black void for a mouth. It was always smiling and staring directly at me with its dead soul. However, I only ever saw the mask. I never saw anything beyond the black voids or below the white rim. I only saw the haunting face burned to the back of my eyelids. When I was 14, I started dating a girl that I met at a convention. For the sake of privacy, we'll call her T. T was raised Wiccan and introduced me to a side of the world that I had never experienced. I grew up in a very Christian household, and the things she showed me broke every rule I had ever learned when it came to spirits in the afterlife. Some of the most interesting things she showed me were the astral plane, or astral projection, and a game called Doors of the Mind. The game became an obsession of mine, and I convinced a friend to play with me. I could make an entire post on the experiences I had in the hallway. We both became very familiar with the game, and spent a lot of time in the deep of our subconscious. For those who don't know what the game is, I'll provide a link at the end of the post for further reading. But the basic idea is that the player lays their head in the guide's lap, and go into a trance-like state. The guide leads the player through a hallway in their mind, subconscious, otherworldly plane, and has them open doors and explore the rooms beyond them. My best friend, who we'll call M, was an amazing guide, and knew exactly when to pull me out. This was, of course, until he couldn't. Fast forward a few years after dating T, and I start talking to a boy who we'll call A. We get extremely close very quickly, but I never told him about my beliefs or experiences. We live in a very conservative place, and I feared what would happen if he didn't approve. One night, during our deep conversations, he began talking about his experiences with the paranormal. Again, another separate post I could make. He said that since he was little, he had seen a shadowy figure in a black formal suit. He was tall and thin, and had a black aura all around him. The figure would always be right out of sight in the waking world, and right in front of him in the dream world. However, it was always consistent that the man never had a face. He could only see from the neck down. I immediately freaked out, and told him about my experiences with Mask. At this point, he'd been around enough that he deserved a name. We began swapping stories that seemed to match this man, and obviously got extremely weirded out. In the end, though, we chalked it off as a coincidence, and went home for the night. This is where shit started getting weird. Mask, who had been staying in my nightmares for years, started becoming the star of my visions, which also became more and more frequent. Each time I saw him, he got closer and closer. However, he remained a mask. He was still never a full person. I couldn't even get into the astral plane because he would show up, and follow me around as I wandered my house in astral form. I started losing sleep and my anxiety spiked. A tried his best to console me, but it didn't help that his own figure had been appearing more frequently as well. As far as we could tell, Mask was becoming stronger and wanted to make his presence known, whatever that presence was. After weeks of sleepless nights, I called M in tears and told him to come over immediately. I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted to confront Mask, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. If I went to the astral plane, I was vulnerable, but if I went into the hallway, I would have a safe guide to pull me out if needed. He was apprehensive, but I pretty much told him that he could guide me, or I would go in by myself. I was done. He eventually agreed and I slipped into the hallway. When I got there, nothing was out of the ordinary. The hallway was lined with doors and lamps, as it always was, but I could feel a chill go down my spine despite the presence of a physical being. I saw a few empty rooms before stepping into a bedroom. The room was dark, as they usually are, but it was brightly colored. A bed sat in the center and a chair sat in the corner. I took a look around, trying to find anything that could help me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a red flashing light, right above the door I had just entered. A security camera was screwed into the corner. I mentioned this to M, who had told me to leave the room. As I did so, I stopped in my tracks. Standing in the doorway was Mask. I mean, the full Mask. He towered over me, and his suit was in full display. His white face sat smiling down at me, and I could feel my stomach plummet. I slammed the door, but when I turned around, he sat perched in the chair in the corner. I tried to gain my composure and back out of the room, but the door disappeared behind me. I was trapped. Then he started talking. His mouth didn't move, but I could hear his wispy voice echo all around me. He told me that he had been waiting to meet me, and I gained the courage to ask what he wanted. Side note, according to M, at this point my physical body went completely limp, and I fell silent. I would occasionally hum or take a sharp intake of breath, but beyond that, he couldn't get a response from me. Mask told me that he wanted one thing: me. Now I never have been able to figure out what he meant by that, but I never want to find out either. When I refused, Mask cocked his head and kept his eyes trained on me. Suddenly the white mask peeled back to expose a bright red tangle of scorching tendrils. They shot out towards me, picking me up by the throat. My physical body stopped breathing at this point, and began to panic. He pulled me close to him and whispered that I had 3 days to change my mind, and released me. Before my body hit the floor, my physical body sprang up, gasping for air. M told me as I sobbed, and A spent several more hours trying to calm me down, enough to explain what happened. Luckily, we record all of our hallway adventures, so I had a recording to show him instead of explaining. I still have that damn file on my phone. It haunts me. The pause when I talk to Mask is just utterly disturbing. But needless to say, I was a mess for the next 3 days. I missed classes and kept looking over my shoulder at every turn. When the third day came, I couldn't find a thing out of place. I thought I had imagined all of it. On the fourth day, however, I had one of the unluckiest days of my life. Flat tire, saw a fatal wreck, lost my cat for hours. It was awful, but after that, Mask went silent. He stopped showing up in visions and nightmares. A stopped seeing him everywhere. I stopped being scared. I started going back to the astral plane without worry, but I refused to go to the hallway ironically. Everything seemed to calm down. As far as I could tell, he was gone. Recently though, he's started showing back up. It's faint, but his presence is there. He's in the background of dreams, and very far away in visions. Hell, sometimes I'll see him in a crowd of people. He's back, and it scares the hell out of me. That's why I'm here. I've searched every book and website I can find, but I can't find any reference to a spirit like this, so I don't know what he would be. If anyone has any ideas, I'm all ears. I'm willing to take any help at this point. I can't go back to not sleeping. But I've had a nightmare every night for a week. He's getting closer. I can feel it.
Number 1. Uncle Charlie's. This is my mother's story. Although my Uncle Charlie died when I was 7 years old, I do have very pleasant memories of him. He was a nice and pleasant man, and he was Uncle Charlie to everyone, whether he was your uncle or not. He was married to my great aunt Sybil, so he was technically my uncle. I also remember his house. They lived out in the country. The house was on the side of a hill with a gravel driveway. If you were in the house at night, you would always know when a car pulled up in the driveway, because you would hear the crunching on the gravel and see the headlights shining into the house. My mom's cousin Roger was like her best friend. They did a lot of things together. Some thought Roger may have been a little crazy or lying when he told them about an experience he had in the house. He was home alone at night. He heard the crunching of the gravel in the driveway as a car was driving up the driveway. After a moment, he then noticed the headlights coming up the driveway. He heard someone get out of their car and walk up to the house. However, no one actually came inside the house. He was confused and went outside, thinking that something was wrong. When he got out there, he didn't see anyone, and there was no car in the driveway. He would have known if the car had left, even if its headlights did not come on. He would hear it driving on the gravel, but there was nothing. Well, needless to tell you, this scared the crap out of him. Not only that, but no one really believed him either. He was a teenager, and you know how people often think teenagers just make things up for attention. Even my mom, who was great friends with him, didn't really believe him. And then one evening, my mom was over at the house with Roger. As I mentioned, they were very good friends, and it wasn't abnormal for people in my family in that area to go out and leave the kids at home alone. At nighttime, they were watching TV with the lights off. They were in the living room, and that was when both of them heard the crunching of tires driving up the gravel driveway. As usual, this was followed by the headlights shining into the window. They shone, and then when the car stopped, they went out. There was the sound of somebody getting out of the car and slamming the door. This time, they heard the person walking around the side of the house. They then heard the side door of the house being opened and then shut. Footsteps then walked down the hallway into the bathroom down the hall. And they waited for a moment or so, but they did not hear anything else. They wondered, of course, what was going on. So they got up and went down the hall to see who it was that had come home. It could have been Uncle Charlie. It could have been a cousin, an aunt and uncle, or anyone. This was on a weekend, and it was not unusual for all sorts of relatives to come to Uncle Charlie's home. And generally, everyone just let themselves in. But there was no one in the house at all. The side door of the house was locked. They went over to the front window to look out into the driveway. There was no car in the driveway. There was no one out there and no indication that anyone had been out there. Worry set into both of them. They went outside and called and looked around, wondering if a family member was playing a joke on them, but they found no one. Scared, going back into the house, my mom absolutely believed Roger now. They turned on the lights and locked all the doors and waited for Uncle Charlie to come home. Number 2. Shadow. On one of KOC's streams, I heard him talking about having partial seizures. I thought it was brave to talk about that, because I had them too, but I don't like bringing it up. I guess it makes me feel weak or something, but I wanted to share my story about it. I've had epilepsy my entire life. Although full seizures are rare, they do happen. But partial seizures are more common, even when I have been taking my medicine. Most of them are accompanied by auditory hallucinations, but there are some visual ones as well. The one that I always get more often, visually, was of the shadow figure. I don't really know what else to call it than that. It was the dark, filled-in shape of a person, more or less. I tended to see the shadow person when I was more likely having a migraine or something like that. But I got used to it after a while, and it stopped scaring me very much. I didn't really mention it to many people, other than my family. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I don't like really talking about my epilepsy too much. When I was about 13 years old, we had moved to a new neighborhood, about a year before this story took place. It was hard making new friends, mostly because the people who lived in that area had known each other for a really long time. So I very much felt like I was on the outside, trying to find a place to fit in. I lucked out, in that around the time my family moved to that area, another boy my age did too. Since we had problems making friends with the other people, we both became pretty good friends. I had been dealing with the partial seizures for some time by the time that we had become friends. His name is Alex, by the way. Although I didn't tell too many people about it, I did make sure that he knew. We spent enough time together that in case I had a full seizure or something, it was something that he should know about. But other than that, we never talked about it. Alex and I both had sleepovers at each other's houses pretty often too. It was necessary, because we played so many video games and often well into the night, that it was just normal for us to fall asleep in the room we were in at some point. After about 6 months, from the time that Alex and I had become friends, we were in my room playing video games. My parents were both asleep long before either of us fell asleep. I don't recall how late it was before I dozed off on my bed. I was woken up, though, by Alex shaking me awake. He must have turned the game system off after I passed out, because it was dark in the room. I was very groggy and I tried to get my bearings, but I found it very hard to do so. "What's going on?" I asked him, still half asleep. Alex tried to tell me something, but then he stopped. He tried to tell me a few times, but for some reason he kept stopping, before telling me what was wrong. "Alex, are you okay?" I asked, now getting concerned. I don't even know how to bring this up," he began. His voice was hesitant and I could tell he was very afraid. "Tell me what?" I asked. I think your house is haunted," he told me. That was definitely not what I had been expecting to hear from him. "Why would you think that?" I asked him. "Well, I went to the bathroom about 5 minutes ago, and when I turned on the light, I saw a shape standing behind the shower curtain," he told me. "I don't know how else to describe it, but it was as if a shadow was standing up on its own." Well, of course that surprised me. When I asked him to elaborate, he described, in essence, the shadow person that I had been seeing for years. This was something that I had never told him about, and always thought he was simply a hallucination caused by my seizures. My family had never seen him, and I knew they would not have told Alex about it. Hell, even if they had, I still knew Alex was telling the truth. His fear alone told me that. What really struck me as odd is that the Shadow Man was something I'd seen in the home before the one Alex saw him in. So if it is a ghost and not a hallucination, then it somehow followed me from one home to the other. I still live at home, and I have seen him a few times since. However, there's now a dread associated with him that I had never had before. I'll be going off to college soon, and living in a dorm room, and I have to wonder if he will follow me again. Number 3. The night I became a ghost. Many people may be familiar with the concept of astral travel. Supposedly, this is the ability to separate one's astral body. The only other way I think to express it is the soul from one's body, so that the soul can take spirit journeys to other realms, while one's body is left safely at home. Shamans in many human cultures throughout history have presumably trained themselves to take such journeys regularly in order to gain occult knowledge or insight about the future, about a person's health, or perhaps to take a peek at other dimensions. There also have been reports of spontaneous astral travel, where the event just happens to a person without their conscious control. People who experience near-death experiences often report their souls rising up, looking down and seeing their bodies lying below them. I once had no opinions about astral travel, one way or the other. I neither believed it nor disbelieved in it. I simply didn't know. Then an experience happened to me one night. It started out much like any other night, except that I felt more tired than usual, and had decided to retire early. I recall it was a lovely winter night, very close to the Yuletide, and a gentle snow was falling outside. I snuggled down in bed to listen to my favorite YouTube channel, preparing myself for sleep. I felt very comfortable, and was just drifting off, when I felt an unaccustomed lifting, a sense of weightlessness. I felt as though I were floating and suspended in air, rather than sinking into the oblivion of a consciousness, as usual, and that my consciousness had shifted. I was hyper-alert, more even than when in a waking state. I opened my eyes and, lo and behold, I found myself floating near the ceiling, looking down at my inert body, peacefully lying in bed, faintly illuminated by the glow of my laptop screen. I marveled at this situation. I had not sought this. I had not expected it. It was just happening without any effort on my part. Oddly, I felt no fear, none at all. I just assumed that I was dreaming. Was this what people call a lucid dream? Is so-called astral travel and so-called lucid dreaming one and the same? I had no idea. I just found myself, with some part of myself, marveling at the experience. Two things I remember were the sense of weightlessness and the lack of any physical discomfort. I felt buoyant and light and rather excited by it all. I also felt a strong desire to leave, to fly, to spread my wings as it were. The nearby window beckoned me, and before I knew it, I was on the other side of it. Opening it had not been necessary. All I knew was that I was free. I didn't feel the coldness of the winter air at all, but I was flying very swiftly through it, flying very swiftly indeed, as if with the power of a single thought. Soon I found myself over a vast dark ocean. The water looked very cold and unbroken as far as my eyes could see. Soon I reached land again, and found myself in a town. It wasn't any town I was familiar with. The houses seemed strange. They looked old. They were all covered with the same wooden clapboard siding, stained deep brown and unpainted. All these buildings were close together, attached in fact, as townhouses are. Some of the buildings had 3 or 4 floors, others were lower, but they were all attached. I don't know why, but I got the impression I might be in a Scandinavian country, although I've never been to Scandinavia. The night was very dark and it seemed very cold, although I couldn't feel it, and flakes of snow were drifting about in the air. I found myself being drawn to one particular lighted window among this pile of buildings, one of the taller houses. Before I knew it, I was through this window and inside. It became immediately apparent to me that a big party was going on. A holiday party, as it was to Yule. There was much light, laughter, and chatting. People were moving about, sitting or standing with drinks in their hands. They all were dressed very nicely. I specifically remember a tall, attractive blond man leaning against a counter that separated the wide entrance hall from an open concept kitchen living room area where many other people were. This man was wearing a lovely knitted jumper or sweater. He was holding a drink and chatting with another man. I moved closer to these people, only to realize that they had no cognizance of me at all. I even waved a hand before their faces and they didn't react. Clearly I was entirely invisible to them. I was, in essence, a ghost. I didn't overly marvel at this interesting situation. I more or less accepted it, and began moving from room to room, exploring the house. What amazed me more was how vivid everything seemed. I could discern every detail of my surroundings, the furnishings, the people, the activity, the sounds. I recall that one room was filled with toys. After making a circuit of the downstairs rooms, I came out once more into the wide entrance hall. which included a wide staircase of dark hardwood, balustraded, with the same on both sides. The wood was rather scuffed and worn with age, but the whole house, although it clearly was older, was very well appointed and comfortable. It had good vibes. 2 children sat on the stairs, a boy and a girl, looking between 8 and 10 years old. They were chatting and playing, happily, and also were dressed in their holiday best. The girl wore a bright red dress with white lace trim. The boy wore blue slacks and a jumper. I approached them with the idea of moving beyond them, and hence up the stairway to explore the upstairs, but at this point, something rather shocking happened. The little girl looked up, and suddenly her eyes focused right on me. Her eyes widened, her entire face filled with utter terror, and before I knew it, she emitted a piercing scream. When this all happened so fast, I remember thinking, "Do you mean that you can actually see me?" Because all the adults could not. For some reason, obviously, I was visible to this girl. In an instant, I felt myself being pulled back. It was rather like the sensation I imagine a telescope might feel when it's being retracted. The entire scene before me collapsed. I was back in bed and awake, with the voice from my laptop droning away next to me. The experience remains for me one of the most profound that I could perhaps label as paranormal, although it was very much different than most that you hear about. Usually a narrator recalls an experience of seeing a ghost, often when they were a child. In this instance, it was I who was the ghost. It is perfectly natural, I suppose, for people to react with fear and shock when they suddenly see someone or something that shouldn't be there. I suspect I might feel just the same. But I wonder if every encounter of this sort need be seen as malevolent. Perhaps many so-called ghosts are merely what I was on that particular winter night. An unexpected soul traveler who finds themselves gypsying in places just as strange to them as they may seem to the rare and gifted person capable of detecting their presence. Since this time, I have begun a course of self-training, and today I am capable of taking astral or lucid soul journeys at will. I have been many places and met many interesting people on these journeys, and have gained much insight that I would call profound, but I have never encountered the little girl in the red dress again. My experiences thus far have shifted my former view of what I define as supernatural. Maybe someday such experiences will become perfectly natural. Maybe someday we will recognize ghosts as just fellow souls who, voluntarily or involuntarily, are having a go at parting some interdimensional curtain. And if we catch sight of someone peeking in at us, we can just wave and say, "Hello."
That is
Mom
black
gets
and white.
candles to light.
Alright. Are you ready? Happy
birthday
birthday
to
to
you.
you.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, Christina. I started to call her Big X. Happy
Big
birthday
birthday
to
to
you.
And many more.
Thank you.
Hey, got a video.
Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. I hope you enjoyed these stories. I particularly like the ending of the last one. It seemed more spiritual than scary to me until the little girl screamed. I mean, that just freaked me out a little bit. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell below. Or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night.